Fate. At the moment, Jessica seemed so sweet and innocent. Her blonde hair glistened like gold, and the little bit of sunlight that had seeped in through the boarded-up windows caught her curls. Her rosy red cheeks, so flush and full of life, radiated a warm glow in the dimly lit room, as enchanting and captivating as any of Mother Nature's most awe-inspiring phenomena. Truly, Michael thought to himself, she was the most beautiful little girl in the world. He admired his daughter one last time as he raised the gun to her head. The shot roared through the house like a thunderstorm. Skull and brain fragments flew through the air as his daughter's carcass slumped to the ground in a broken heap. Carefully, Michael dragged Jessica's dead body across the floor and laid it next to her mother and brother's corpses. A single tear escaped his eye, but before the grief managed to overwhelm him, he took a deep breath and said a prayer to compose himself. It would all be over soon. Michael peered out the second-story bedroom window of his home. Hordes of the infected stretched as far as his eye could see, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before they would blow through his home like a plague of locusts. Many of them had already made it inside, and his bedroom door was beginning to buckle as the banging on the other side of it grew louder. It would not be long before the monsters broke through. He looked into the chamber of his revolver. Jessica had received his last bullet. The final gift a father could give his daughter. And as horrible as it was, at least his family had escaped his fate. The fate that would be crashing through his door at any second. What would you do? I suppose I always pictured myself curling up with my loved ones in a moment like this, tears trickling down our faces while we assured each other that we would all be together again on the other side. For a second, I wonder where my parents are and what my sister is up to. As thoughts of my family fade away into the Aether, my focus once again turns to the man whose face I'm currently stomping into a bloody pulp. I could feel his cartilage and bone crunching under the heel of my boot. No one tries to stop me. Hell, there are about a half-dozen other murders going on in the street at the same time. It's amazing how only 6 days ago people were shuffling through this intersection, briefcases and designer purses in hand, on their way to work. Now the street is alive with people fighting, screaming, looting, even fucking. I peer up towards the night sky and wipe some sweat away from my brow. It looks bigger than the moon now. I marvel at its majesty as I drag my foot along the ground, wiping brain across asphalt as if I had been stepping on dog shit. The eggheads at NASA are predicting that it should pierce our atmosphere and make impact within the next half hour. Experts are expecting it to wipe out 98% of life on Earth. But you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realize that when a rocket the size of Australia collides with your planet, there's not much of a choice for survival. When I scan the scene looking for someone else to kill or fuck, who cares, right? We'll all be dead soon anyway. But don't judge me. Deep down, you know you'd do the same. The Hunter and the Bear. A hunter trekked silently through the woods one early autumn morning. Rays of sunshine pierced the forest canopy above him, hanging down from the treetops like an assortment of glowing orange party streamers. The calm and stillness of the woods had always been therapeutic for him. Being alone between the trees with nothing but a rifle in his thoughts was the only thing that seemed to help wash his troubles away. However, on this day, the hunter's peace was short-lived when the serenity of the forest was abruptly interrupted by the approaching thunder of heavy footsteps. The startled hunter spun around to see an adult-sized grizzly bear galloping full speed in his direction. The gigantic, powerful beast barreled through the bushes, bulldozing anything that got in its path. The hunter raised his gun to fire on the advancing animal, but feared that the bear was gaining ground far too fast. He turned to run, but accidentally dropped his rifle to the forest floor in the process. The bear's mouth hung agape, enormous teeth glistening in the early morning light as it followed the hunter. He knew he would not be able to match the creature's speed, but hoped that he could evade it just long enough to find some cover or safety. Through the trees he sprinted, hoping, searching to find refuge from his unstoppable pursuer. A fallen branch caught his foot, causing him to topple forward onto the ground. He turned to his back and saw the massive bear, closer than ever, still striding towards him. The hunter raised his arms over his head and let out a scream, dreading his cries would be his last. But the bear bounded right past him. He watched curiously as the colossal creature continued on until it disappeared into the foliage of the forest. Stunned but relieved to be alive, the hunter let out a sigh. He stood up and stared back in the direction he had come to retrieve his gun. It was short-lived after this that he came to realize that the grizzly bear had not been chasing him. Something had been chasing it, and he was standing directly in its path. He screamed again, once more dreading that it would be his last. Unfortunately for the hunter, this time, it would be. To be normal. What would you do to be normal? I would do anything. Sure, it's easy to look down your nose at me, to say that it's okay to be special, or that we should strive to be one of a kind, but the difference between you and myself is that my uniqueness was unfairly thrust upon me. I did not ask for it. So, I did what I had to do. Last night, I waited for my brother to fall asleep. When I knew that he was out, I covered his face with my pillow, and I pinned him to the bed. It wasn't long before he woke up, of course, and once his groggy mind started to comprehend what was going on, he began to thrash and kick like a wild man. I've always been the stronger of the two of us, but I'm not too proud to admit that it took almost every ounce of strength I had in my body to keep him subdued. Thankfully, though, as his lungs became starved for oxygen, his hips started to buckle with less force, and his punches slowed to sluggish, tolerable blows. Eventually, he stopped moving altogether. Oh, you should have seen the look of relief on my face when I checked his pulse to find that it was non-responsive. Murdering my brother was the hardest thing I've ever done. I loved him. Hearing his muffled cries seep out from underneath my pillow was scarring. I'm certain those last desperate pleas for mercy will stay with me for the rest of my life, but like I said before, I would do anything to be normal. You see, my parents wouldn't have let us go through the operation otherwise. The doctors said that separating conjoined twins like my brother and I could have been problematic. They told our folks that our organs were too intertwined, and if they performed the procedure, one of us would surely die. It was a sacrifice no one was willing to make. No one, except me. Now they have no choice. And as the anesthesiologist begins to put me under, I look at my brother's corpse, take hold of his cold, lifeless hand, and smile. Because soon, I will finally get the chance to be normal. The stranger's dead. Knock, knock. The knock on the door startled Marie. It was too late to be experiencing visitors. She had just put her son to bed. Her husband Eric was hunched over at the sitting area in the foyer, with a glass of 30-year-old scotch in one hand and his head in the other. He had seemed uncharacteristically distraught as of late. Marie loved her husband, but she realized she hadn't been very attentive lately. Between running her charity, attending social functions, and playing on one of the country club's tennis teams, she hadn't gotten the opportunity to ask Eric what had been troubling him. She knew his company had recently dropped a couple of points in the stock market, so she just assumed it was a money issue. To her, a little bit of cash was nothing to fret over. After all, they had come from practically nothing, and now they had plenty of it. It would be fine. The knock came again. Knock, knock. Marie tugged on the heavy oak door to reveal an ominous-looking stranger standing behind it. He was so tall that he had to duck his massive head under the oversized door's 10-foot-tall frame and enter the room. His skin was pale, almost snow-white, a stark contrast to his intense, shadowy eyes, two dark pieces of coal buried deep into the sunken sockets of his face. The stranger wore a long black trench coat, buttoned down from his neck all the way to just below his knees. His hands and feet were massive, nearly twice the size of a normal man's. When he smiled at Marie, she caught a glimpse of his teeth, jagged and pointed. They looked like they belonged in the mouth of a carnivorous predator. The stranger turned his monstrous head towards Marie's husband and began to speak. His voice was low and gravelly, but so powerful she felt it rumble through the room's walls and her body alike. Eric Wallace, I have come to collect my debt. It was at that moment Marie understood what was going on. The success of Eric's internet startup, the big house on the hill, the fancy cars, the charity, and most importantly, the horrible, giant, inhuman-looking man who had just entered their home. Eric had made a deal with the devil. She flung herself to the demon's feet. "Please, you can't take his soul," she cried. "There has to be another way." The stranger reached out a long, bony finger and caressed her wet, tear-soaked cheeks. "Oh, my dear," he began. "I'm afraid you misunderstood. Your husband didn't sell me his soul. He sold me yours."